I saw him eliminate the entire Minnesota backfield. He put Brown and Mason out in 2 straight plays, and the following week he put Horning and Taylor out with clotheslines in 2 consecutive plays.
If you want to take a man out, it's very easy to do, looking him square in the eye, and that was my whole approach in the game. I wanted to put as much fear into his heart and as much pain on his back as I possibly could.
Sprinkle never liked to lose. Sprinkle was not a dirty football player, as a lot of people think he was. But he wanted to give you the impression that he was, and that gave him the edge.
He hits a goalpost with his forearm, knocks a goalpost. I'm going to go, whack, crack, and the whole goalpost goes right down. My whole guys, all the guys are looking like this. Oh.
He had an arm that was like a leg. I mean, his arm was about this big. He had the biggest arms I'd ever seen in my life.
He was nasty. He would intimidate you with his chatter.
They would get so crazy that they would try to hurt me. And that's the people that never touched me.
Pro football linemen are a special breed. They've always been physically larger than everyone else, but only a few have been larger than life. These are the game's legendary linemen. Men whose skill, determination, and consistent level of excellence have earned them a celebrated status. Now, the first player in our collection of legends is Jim Parker. He was an All-Pro for the Baltimore Colts for 8 straight years. The first 4 as a tackle, the second 4 as a guard. Now, in direct proportion to his huge size was his humor and generosity. John Unitas once said, Jim Parker had a heart a mile wide and a body big enough to contain it.
In 1957, the Baltimore Colts' top draft choice was a 6-foot 5-inch, 300-pound All-American lineman named Jim Parker, who found pro football in Baltimore to be a step down from what he was used to at Ohio State.
It was a tough transition coming from Ohio State to Baltimore. For me it was. It took me about 2.5 years to get accustomed to being poor. I came to Baltimore in 1957. We had one whirlpool, and if you wasn't a quarterback, if you wasn't a running back, you didn't touch it. And in cold days, they had 2 hand warmers. That was for the quarterback and the receivers. And you had to fight to get one of those hand warmers to get your hand warm. I remember in Green Bay, it was so cold out there, me and about 5 other guys spotted an old glove laying on the field, and we dove on it and almost lost all 5 of us trying to get to that one glove to put on our hand.
Big Jim Parker lived in a dream world, and his surrealistic visions were the source and sustenance of his professional greatness.
In the back of my mind, I would fantasize a lot. On pass blocking, I would pretend I was a mountain, and that the other guy, he had to get around this mountain, and it was impossible. Sometimes I would pretend I was a freight train running over a pedestrian and just psych myself up before every play.
You run into Jim Parker, it's like just running into the side of a house. I mean, he likes to say of himself as a truck, but you can maybe get away from the truck, but here's the side of a house. And I ran into Parker, and he never gave an inch.
Parker was like putting an apartment house in the line. I mean, literally, the man was so huge. And when I first saw Jim Parker play, I was amazed because he had great quickness, good feet, good balance, and also this incredible size and strength. And I think perhaps the most difficult thing for me to deal with as a defensive lineman was someone who had this huge bulk, who still had enough mobility to move around.
Parker's blocks opened the holes that Lenny Moore ran through en route to the Hall of Fame. But it was in the service of quarterback John Unitas that Jim Parker truly excelled.
He was a workhorse. You couldn't work him hard enough, and I don't think Jim ever refused to do anything that you asked him. And you hardly got any conversation out of Jim in a huddle. Most of the times I asked, Jim, you all right? Mm-hmm. That was it with him. But that's the type of individual that Jimmy was. He was an unselfish man, and he gave everything he had for you.
Parker's peerless pass protection enabled John Unitas and Raymond Berry to develop into the era's most successful pitch and catch combination. For when Jim Parker was living out his fantasies, it was tough for mere mortals to make it around the mountain.
I think the best offensive lineman that I played against had to be Jim Parker. He was the toughest individual that I've ever faced in my life.
Yeah, I tell you what, I've seen him mash people and bury them and then gore them. Too many to list.
When I played for the Minnesota Vikings, Jim Parker not only knocked me out on a trap play, but also broke my hand running over me.
Jim was the kind of fella who could get a player put on waivers, a good player. He ruined many Sunday afternoons for defensive ends who were good defensive ends until they tangled with him. He was super. I don't know of any defensive lineman who played at that time who would not vote for him for their all-time all-pro team.
Jim Parker, the Baltimore Colts' moving mountain, and quite arguably the best offensive lineman of all time. The first pure blocker to be elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
David Deacon Jones had a special talent for drawing a bead on quarterbacks and a special flair for drawing attention to himself. As a pass rusher and a personality, Jones was responsible for glamorizing the faceless people in the pits. Thanks to the Deacon, defense was no longer regarded as a solemn, colorless part of Sunday services in the NFL.
In the beginning, the assembled multitudes confined their worship to those gods of autumn that played offense. But then, a deacon from the deep south converted the flock. This deacon was baptized David Jones, and his nickname was not exactly a reverent tribute to the humble virtues of that old-time religion.
Deacon was a public relations stunt. I needed a nickname when I came into the game. My real name is David Jones, and you look at the LA phone book, you see 25 or 30 David Joneses in there, and I needed something to set me apart from the rest of the pack, other than the fact that I was the best football player.
Funk and flash were the trademarks of a one-armed bandit who yielded a jackpot of big plays. Though long on strength and speed, the Deacon was initially short and savvy.
I was probably one of the greenest football players that ever came in the NFL. I had a particular tough time when I came up because I did not have the fundamental background that I needed. So I made a lot of mistakes, but because I was quick and fast, I was able to make up for it. And I could outrun daylight.
He used his ego as a way of getting motivated. And he became his own PR agent, and sometimes I think loved watching the reporters' mouths drop open when he would say something just outrageous.
I would safely say at this point in time, I was the fastest in the history of the game, from a dead standstill. My lateral movements along with my initial speed was just fantastic.
He was tabbed as Secretary of Defense, but diplomacy was not his forte. The Deacon would never put his signature on a non-aggression pact.
If you want to take a man out, it's very easy to do, looking him square in the eye, and that was my whole approach in the game. I wanted to put as much fear into his heart and as much pain on his back as I possibly could.
Hellfire and brimstone fueled the relentless pursuit that reflected the Deacon's doctrine of search and destroy.
You got this 260 pounds up to 4.5, and you got an angle on him, he should go to the hospital. And that's exactly what I tried to do. With no remorse in my heart, I tried to put him in the hospital every time I tackled him. I wanted to hit, when I hit, and put my back into it, boom. I mean, that's gonna provide that shot that's gonna put the intimidating fear of God into that running back. Let him know and make him go back to that huddle and tell his quarterback, damn it, I'm not running in Deacon Jones' area anymore. So each time he came over there, I tried to tear his damn head off.
When Jones wasn't tearing at heads, he was slapping at them. was the man who devised the fine art of belting a blocker on the side of the helmet.
I developed the thing they call a head slap. The head slap was to do two purposes. One was to give myself an initial head start on the pass rush. In other words, an extra step. Because anytime you go upside a man's head or a woman, then they have a tendency to blink their eyes or close their eyes, and that was all I needed. Gail Sears had a statement out that all he needed was 16 inches. Well, all I needed was a blink of the old eyes, and I was by you.
I remember once, he was getting in on a fellow from the 49ers, really barreling through. And finally, the fellow was tired, so he grabbed him. So I threw my flag and said, 77, you're holding him. The guy looks at me and says, how the hell would you play him? And he was right. That's the only way you could have played Deacon Jones.
I never would accept anyone hitting me illegally. Now, when that happens, then you must serve justice. And if you don't know how to serve justice, then you're going to get kicked around the league.
It was the Deacon who usually did the kicking, as he knew how to get a leg up on an opponent. The Secretary of Defense was not averse to playing dirty politics. When Jones wasn't hooking quarterbacks, he was sacking them. Indeed, he invented the term itself.
I developed a term that is used in the game right now called sacking the quarterback. Sacking the quarterback is just like you devastate a city, or you cream a multitude of people. I mean, it's just like you put all the offensive players in one bag, and I just take a baseball bat and beat on the bag. Okay, we just found the term.
Every time the Deacon pillaged the pass pocket, he made the term's meaning painfully clear. This battering ram became a less than electrifying charger in 1972. But even on the downside of his career, he still approached every Sunday as if it were Judgment Day, and occasionally flashed the brilliance that had showed fans it was possible to shout hallelujah when the defense took the field. The gospel, according to Deacon Jones, meant waging a never-ending assault on the opposition, and throughout his career, he always practiced what he preached.
And I like to think that with that approach to the game, attack, 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 I walked out totally unmarked. And I think that record in itself, 14 years in the pros and 4 in college and 3 in high school, is second to none. I have no scratches, no marks, and nothing but a bleeding heart.
Sometimes the name can tell you a lot about the man. Chuck Bednarik. Now, just the sound of that name is a character reading. Tough, hard, unforgiving. In the 1960 championship game, Bednarik, at the age of 35, played every minute on offense and defense, and his legendary performance led the Eagles to a victory over the Packers. I remember seeing Bednarik after that game puffing on a huge victory cigar. But the smoke he generated in the locker room was only a pale reminder of the fire he left on the field.
Since the turn of the century, eastern Pennsylvania steel mills have nurtured a special breed of men. 4 generations of hardy immigrant stock have been forged in the fiery furnace of the open hearth. One such steel town is Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and one such man is Charles Bednarik. The son of Czechoslovakian immigrants, Bednarik grew up on the playing fields of Bethlehem, waiting to join his father at the mill. But World War II changed his destiny, and he grew up quickly as an 18-year-old B-24 waist gunner. After surviving 30 missions over Germany, Bednarik chose football over steel.
earning All-American honors at Penn, All-Pro recognition with the Eagles, and being enshrined in both the college and pro football halls of fame. Yet through it all, the man never strayed far from the streets he knew as a boy.
This little home right here, believe it or not, was my favorite home. We were 6 kids and my mother and father in this house. I couldn't speak English until I was 6 years old and went to 1st grade. My parents couldn't do it. My mother was, maybe 5'2", 220, typical hard-working, tough Slovak woman. Look at here, there, you're on television.
No,
Co oni tu robia, Asia?
No.
At the age of 81, Mary Bednarik still remembers some words of wisdom she gave to young Charlie.
And they told me, and I told him like that, don't hit him first. But if he hit you, anybody hit you first, give it to him. Give him a good one. That's what I said, give him a good one.
I kind of grew up in what you'd call a semi-violent world, no question about it. And this is what gave me that, like I always just say, animal instinct and killer instinct when I played a contact sport.
Bednarik's combative nature was defined forever by one tackle he made in 1960. Frank Gifford of the New York Giants was on the receiving end of a hit that reverberates still in the hearts of Philadelphia fans. While Concrete Charlie's toughness could be traced to his mother, his tenacity was a direct reflection of a wiry little man named Charles Bednarik Sr.
My dad, he worked as a laborer in the open hearts. The open hearts is the hottest job that you can have in the steel mills. This is actually where they melt the steel. Red hot molten steel is going in the molds. Right around that furnace, it's about 220 degrees. It was a tough job. Had the war not broke out, I had one ambition: to go to work in the mills to help my father. World War II came along, and I was an 18-year-old kid, and those combat missions, I think I grew up because I was very fortunate to survive 30 missions. Came home, and I said to myself, I'm going to go to school.
Here's Chuck Bednarik, Pennsylvania's All-American center. His exploits on the field are well known, and the Eagles are counting on him. Make sure you see this great Eagle team in action in 1949.
With the Eagles, Bednarik immediately displayed the remarkable versatility that would make his pro career unique.
Most people think of Bednarik as a linebacker. He's a great linebacker, not taking anything away from Chuck. But a lot of people forget that he was far and away the best offensive center in pro football. He might have been one of the great offensive centers of all time.
And that son of a gun, when he went both ways against us, that bothered me a great deal. If he's going both ways and I've got my guys are going one way each, somebody's got to handle him. And he was dominating us. I truly believe he'd be happy if he'd be confronted that way for every week of his life.
In the 1960 championship game against the Green Bay Packers, Bednarik became the NFL's last 60-minute man. But that's not how he wants to be remembered.
And I remember one time somebody said to me, what do you want to be most remembered for? And I said that I was a guy that came from poor people, made it big, got all the adulations and all the awards that you can get that any athlete ever got, and I never forgot my friends and my roots, and I want to be back home here with them. You got to play with that killer instinct, man. You got to hate that guy across from you. Then after the game's over, tell him what a nice guy he is. Shake his hand, especially if you win, right?
Chuck Bednarik, a legendary lineman in whom reality matches the myth.
At 6'8", 275 pounds, Doug Atkins is the largest player in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. In a newspaper article, Red Smith once described him as a grizzled giant, huge and rugged, of a type we are prone to believe was more common in other days when the world was young. In the world of pro football, myths and stories have accumulated around Doug Atkins like rings around Saturn.
His shoulders and arms were massive. He had great big arms and shoulders, man. He's visited me on occasion here in Nashville, and he would walk down the streets, and people still look up at him and just look at how big he is.
He had an arm that was like a leg. I mean, his arm was about this big. Had biggest arms I'd ever seen in my life.
The guy was 6'8", 280 pounds of just all muscle. He could high jump 7 feet. He could beat you any way he wanted to beat you.
My first recollection of Doug Atkins was when we played the Bears in an exhibition game in 1965, and Skoronsky was offensive captain. I mean, I really looked up to him. And so when he came to me before the game, he said, look, here's some things I want you to remember. Number 81 is Doug Atkins. He's 6'9", he weighs 265 pounds. He said, don't cut him. And if he falls down, you help him up and say, nice play, Mr. Atkins. Well, I started to laugh. And Skoronsky said, kid, this is not a joke. And I'm not kidding you now, because if you cut him on his knees, the first thing he's going to do is kill you, and then he's going to kill me.
For 17 years, Doug Atkins played defensive end in the NFL, leaving in his wake a trail of flattened quarterbacks and trampled blockers. In Chicago, under the strict tutelage of Coach George Halas, Doug was a rebellious student, the kind who got A's on tests and F's in deportment, and took equal pride in both.
I was having a little weight problem, and someone suggested that I drink martinis, that they would dehydrate you. Usually I like to drink beer, you know, and give you a good appetite. So I started drinking martinis, and, you know, I didn't have any weight problems, but they didn't tell me how drunk, how much trouble they make you get into. They forgot to tell me that. We were breaking camp this particular night. We'd been out tooting it up a little bit. I thought I'd play Coach Halas a little music, and I turned that music up just loud as I could get it. Oh, he'd come out of there cussing, boy, oh, damn stupid hillbilly, this, that, and the other. We had a big fight right in the hall there. I think he'd swing at you. If you'd hit him, I think he swung back, because he was awful aggressive. And then I looked down the hall and see everybody's heads be peeping out.
He was probably the only guy that had enough guts to battle George Halas, because Doug was, you know, he was a tough guy. We used to have bed check with the Bears, and none of the assistant coaches would dare go in his room. I mean, he was free from bed check. And probably that was a good rule, because there might have been a couple of dead assistant coaches.
When Halas had training camp in Rensselaer, Ditka and Doug did pretty much what they wanted to. Halas would come on the field and say, where's Doug? Where's Doug? We're having defensive drill. Where's Doug? And Doug's on a tractor over there in the cornfields. He's got his shoulder pads with a baseball hat on, plowing the corn patches in Rensselaer, Indiana.
Nobody expected Doug to be a normal practice person. I mean, nobody. It just didn't seem like he was going to practice like everybody else, especially after the season started and he started getting beat up a little bit himself. He just didn't feel like practicing. You just always felt like the best thing to do was just to say, Doug, go get the quarterback.
Doug Atkins was like a storm rolling over a Kansas farmhouse. He came from all directions, and all there was to do was to tie down what you could and hope he didn't take the roof. The legend of Doug Atkins, like the legend of the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot, often strains the bounds of credibility.
I saw him eliminate the entire Minnesota backfield. He put Brown and Mason out in 2 straight plays, and the following week he put Horning and Taylor out with clotheslines in 2 consecutive plays.
Doug stopped, grabbed Ernie McMillan, picked him up over his head, and slammed him to the ground. And that's the last we saw Ernie McMillan that day.
I recall vividly 1961 when we opened with the Bears out in Bloomington, Minnesota. The first play of the game, we had a 220-pound left tackle named Grady Alderman. The first play of the game, he picked Alderman, picked him up off his feet and threw him right at our quarterback. Just threw him about 10 yards through the air. He was probably the strongest guy I've ever seen, and he could jump for a big man. He could jump over people.
I've seen him hurdle Bob Vogel. Bob Vogel's 6'5". I've seen Doug leap completely over him.
Atkins was never at a loss for a trick to deceive his enemies, especially those as formidable as Jim Parker of the Colts.
Jim Parker had been a former boxer. He had weighed about 290 pounds. and he was as mobile as a boxer. He was strong, and there was nobody in football that could beat Jim Parker. The only way Doug knew that he could beat him is if he got Jim mad.
Doug Atkins would sometimes call Jim Parker at the hotel that the Colts were staying and chew Parker out just to get him ready for tomorrow.
I'd wake him up and we'd have a few cuss words over the phone. He's pretty good. He taught me a few words too, I tell you.
He would talk about my grandmother, say something about my father, or just something that provoked me. And after he got me riled, then he thought he could play better football.
I beat him a lot of times, but I'd start talking to him. And the ball be snapped, and I'd be gone.
His voice, he would just continually talk the whole ball game, yakety, yakety, yak. Your grandmother didn't have but one shoe or something like that, and I would get so mad at him, and I would just fight him, and I forget about what I'm supposed to do, and what the play John done called, and the starting counting and everything, and before you know it, we got a battle going.
And Parker would take off his helmet and go to the official, and he'd actually get tears in his eyes, and he'd cry, and he said, "He can't call me that. He can't call me that." And he said, "Jim, there's nothing in the rule books that says he can't call you that." He said, "We're going to have to get a rule changed."
In 1967, Atkins was traded to New Orleans, where the Saints hoped to squeeze one more good season out of his battered 37-year-old body. Instead of one good year, they got 3 great ones.
What's old? I hear coaches say so. We got these young kids. Hey, the young kid can't play. He's no good. I have an old man with 2 years left, and a young man with 10 he can't play. So I think I hear him on TV now. This young. I mean, it's good to be young, but I was a lot better football player at 39 than I was 23.
In 1968, Doug received the first Vince Lombardi Award, given to the most dedicated player in the game. At the awards banquet, he wore a tuxedo for the first time, a tailor-made one, size 56 long. In 1969, Big Doug finally retired. And not even a Hollywood scriptwriter could have written a more fitting end to his career. On his very last play as a pro, Doug Atkins sacked the quarterback.
Green Bay, Wisconsin, although small in size, has produced some big-time football legends. One of them played right guard for the Packers during the 1960s. His name is Jerry Kramer, and like the Packers of that era, he was a tenacious competitor. By the age of 29, he had already endured 23 operations, and his repeated recoveries were a testimony to his toughness. The Green Bay Packers were a legendary team, all right, and one of the main reasons was a legendary lineman named Jerry Kramer. He didn't take the path to greatness. He cleared it.
It has been nearly 20 years since the championship days of the Green Bay Packers. But thanks to the eloquent prose of a lineman turned author named Jerry Kramer, their story remains a bestseller. The pages of distant replay are filled with words and images of snow-laden fields and proud men who covered themselves with equal amounts of mud and glory. Distant replay is also the saga of a talented guard who revolutionized his position by combining considerable brawn with brains.
Jerry, I think, was the thinking guard. Don't misinterpret that. He was physically very tough, but Jerry was smart. He could work his way out of problems because he was able to think quickly on his feet.
We were a running team. I think that's what made the Green Bay Packers our running game. I enjoyed the drive block, and I enjoyed the sweep. The sweep was something we would finish up with every day. A lot of teams run wind sprints at the end of a day. We would run sweeps.
If you look at this play, what we're trying to get is a seal here and a seal here and try to run this play in the alley.
The power sweep was a personal favorite of Vince Lombardi. He saw to it that the Packers perform it with perfection. Ironically, it was Lombardi's legendary pursuit of excellence that helped elevate Kramer's overall game, despite the stubborn lineman's original doubts to the contrary.
I resented him a great deal in the early years. I thought he was a little too demanding, a little too pushy. I thought he was asking for things that I wasn't capable of delivering. But later on, when I began to push myself, when I began to have my own personal quest, then I began to understand what he was really talking about.
Under Lombardi's influence, Kramer pushed himself to a level that often saw him making 2 blocks on a single play. Yet just as he reached his peak, he was struck down by a mysterious illness that stemmed from a boyhood accident when several wood splinters were lodged in his intestine. First diagnosed as cancer, it threatened more than just a career.
I ended up in Mayo Clinic. It went down to about 200 pounds, 198 maybe, and thought I was going to die.
On the field for about 10 minutes, there was like guys going up to each other saying that somebody said Jerry Kramer had actually died. It was just that serious we had heard.
But I looked out the window and thought about taking that route, and I figured that I'd just break myself up into a bunch of pieces and wouldn't do the job completely. So I went home to Green Bay just before Christmas time, and Henry Jordan came out to the airport, picked me up, and literally picked me up in his arms. He got me in his arms from the airport and carried me over to the car and set me down and carried me in the house. And of course, I recovered from that and ended up being able to play 2 or 3 more years, but it was quite an experience.
Kramer's close brush with death is perhaps why he is modest when speaking of accomplishments, for they went far beyond perfecting the power sweep. In the 1962 NFL Championship, Kramer filled in as a kicker and booted Green Bay to a victory. And in 1967, he threw what is considered the greatest block in NFL history, springing Bart Starr for the game winner in a last-second championship victory over Dallas.
Well, I don't remember the games specifically. I remember a few highlights, a few moments, and a few situations, but generally it's just that warm love affair I had with 40 guys. A warm, rich relationship, kind of like a family, kind of like there were 40 brothers on that football team, and I cherish that probably above all else.
Almost all the legendary linemen are men of great size, but bulk isn't always a requisite for success. Ed Sprinkle is proof of that. Now, he wasn't very big or particularly very fast, and he certainly wasn't a classic physical specimen, but he was the most feared defender of his day. Ed Sprinkle made a name for himself, one that was difficult to ignore and impossible to forget. Let's take a look at the legendary lineman nicknamed the Claw.
Well, Ed Sprinkle was probably in his day the most feared pass rusher in football.
Ed Sprinkle was a 190-pound rattlesnake. He was the meanest guy in the world.
Now, Ed Sprinkle is tough, fast, and you really got to watch out for him. Don't turn your back on him or he'll club you.
30, small guy, 205 pounds, tough guy. He hit you when you weren't looking.
I'd hit anybody on any play as hard as I could hit them, and that's the way I played.
Ed Sprinkle seemed more myth than man, and the tales of his violent play spread like wildfire throughout the 1950s. Although Sprinkle was a mean-spirited hard case, he was an excellent player rather than a hitman. So good, in fact, that number 7 was double-teamed on most plays. He was an intense competitor who never gave up and ruled by intimidation, not dirty deeds.
Sprinkle never liked to lose. Sprinkle was not a dirty football player as a lot of people think he was. But he wanted to give you the impression that he was, and that gave him the edge.
He was just short about 4 inches, 3/4 of an inch of being dirty. He always got there just in time to hurt you. But it was in time that it was legal.
He'd run by and stick his arm out and clothesline. And I remember one time we're playing against him out there, and George Radiman was our quarterback. And we're playing him in the Yankee Stadium, and he clotheslined Radiman, and Radiman didn't wake up till the fourth quarter in the locker room in Yankee Stadium. He knocked him out.
Under head coach and owner George Halas, the Chicago Bears were traditionally a rough, tough team. The toughest of the lot was Ed Sprinkle, whose clothesline tackle was his trademark. For this, he was nicknamed the Claw.
When he came in, he used to club you across the head with that left hand, even if it was early or late. He always had my eyes watering all the time. He always clubbed me with that thing across the face, and your eyes would start watering.
You do it with a runner or anyone. If they were running by, when you couldn't tackle them, if you couldn't reach them, you'd reach out and hit them with your arm extended. Then a quarterback, same way, catch them under the chin, and that was the technique about it. It worked pretty good.
Like a bird of prey, the Claw swooped in, using his famous left arm to disrupt plays, leaving his teammates to scavenge the remains. Sprinkle's guillotine left arm savaged quarterbacks and scattered their senses. This unique style of play made him a marked man, a player targeted for swift revenge from his opponents.
Ed went in to block the punt, and we went on the punt return, and about 4 Cardinals got a hold of him and really made mincemeat out of his face. And I talked to Ed later about it and said, well, what do you think about it? He said, oh, everybody has their day.
We were playing Green Bay, and they had a end from Michigan who was a very elusive end, and he played offensive left end, and he had a little mustache, and Halas says, I'll give you $5 for every hair that you pull out of this guy's mustache. See? And they said that they ran a play, and I come running off the field holding my hand and started counting. Now
Although Sprinkle was not a hatchet man, he was stuck with that reputation, and it got to be that players kept one eye out for the ball and the other for the Claw. This was especially true of the Rams' Deacon Dan Towler.
The Rams were about to score, and Waterfield called Towler's number over to our side of the line, my Bulldog Turner and myself, and Towler wouldn't carry the ball, and Waterfield kicked him on the field and sent him off to the sidelines. I hit Dan Towler a couple of times with the shoulders, real aggressive, and I hit him so hard that the next time I came in, he even looked the other way and that's when I got Waterfield.
We had 2 quarterbacks at that time, Waterfield and Van Brockland. He broke Waterfield's cheekbone, put him out of the game, got me in the game, and he got 3 of my ribs later in the ball game.
He remains a contradiction. Some say he was clean and tough. To others, he was vicious. Ed Sprinkle, the angel with a dirty face.
Ed Sprinkle was kind of a Jekyll and Hyde. Off the field, a wonderful guy. Just a very pleasant fellow to be around, a nice guy to be on a party with, and things of that nature. But on the field, his character did change. He was a punishing football player.
Off the field, one of the gentle people of the world. On the field, anything went.
Our next legendary lineman has made a successful transition from football to film. As a defensive tackle for the Detroit Lions, Alex Karras punished ball carriers with the ferocity of a mad dog. Now in his TV roles, Alex is a gruff but good-natured pussycat, and he'll be the first to admit he's no Robert Redford. But his determined toughness on the football field still has his critics applauding.
I realized when I was at a very young age, if I was to stand and do battle with anyone head up, that I could get hurt.
But when number 71, Alex Karras, joined the NFL, he never flinched from head-on combat. The prospect of getting hurt never seemed to bother him. and he could run a long way to inflict pain on others. Karras was blessed with enormous upper body strength and uncommon quickness.
He could get under your pads and he could go by you. He could make your body turn in ways you didn't want to turn. He was an NCAA wrestling champion, so he understood strength and leverage.
Opponents often tried to double team him, but Karras had the ability to make 2 against 1 look like a mismatch. His pass rushing technique was devastating and dainty.
Alex had a very unusual style of pass rushing. He would get up and he would run very quickly on mincing steps, and he was actually on the tip of his toes, and that's why he was called Tippy Toes.
Alex Karras was a great comic figure and a fantasist. And I remember once asking him what he wanted to be when he left football, and he said, "I want to be a Western movie star." He said, "No, I don't want to be called Slim or Tex or anything like that. I want to be called, what was the name he picked for himself? Ace Zerblonsky, that was it." He said he wanted, that was his name. He said, "I want to have a different sort of a name." Ace Zerblonsky he wanted to be, and not only that, but he didn't want to wear a cowboy hat. He wanted to carry a little Japanese parasol.
Come game time, he preferred playing the role of villain.
He was nasty. He would intimidate you with his chatter.
I could get some of them very mad and so upset that they were like the giant bull that would just want to kill me, as opposed to setting up and zeroing in on me.
I would build up a hatred. I would start cussing him, and I would start thinking about him. Maybe a little bit on Tuesday, a little more on Wednesday, and a little more on Thursday, and all day Friday, and all day Saturday, and all day Saturday night, and Sunday morning, to the point where I had worked myself into an emotional state.
They would get so crazy that they would try to hurt me. And then that's the people that never touched me.
Karras' tongue was a lot sharper than his eyesight. Although he saw well enough to find his way to the quarterback, Karras' bad vision and his bad temper enhanced his reputation as a man who played in a blind rage.
We were playing the Bears one time in Chicago, and about in the third quarter, I looked over, and this guy's holding Alex, and Alex is yelling at the guy, "Damn it, stop holding me," you know, and was kicking the guy. And the guy was his brother, Ted Karras. Alex didn't know it was his brother.
Alex Karras was 2 totally different people off the field and on the field. On the field, he hated anybody that had another uniform color on. Meanest man alive. But off the field, just a nice guy.
You're 2 characters. You become kind of schizophrenic. What happens is that you are this whoever you are off the field, and when you're on the field, you are playing the game of war.
In the game of war, Alex Karras distinguished himself for 12 seasons. A 4-time All-Pro, he was selected to the Pro Bowl 3 years in a row. This mighty warrior who muscled his way to the quarterback on mincing steps was part Conan, part comedian. Alex Karras was a one-of-a-kind player, a unique individual, and a legendary lineman.
Offensive tackle Bob Brown was a 5-time All-Pro who played with the Eagles, Rams, and Raiders. He was known as Boomer, and if you want to know how he came by his nickname, just ask any of the defensive players of the 1960s who had to absorb his explosive forearm. Now, Bob Brown was more than muscle and might. When he wasn't burying pass rushers, he was burying his face in a book. Bob earned a master's degree at the University of Pennsylvania. But you still get the impression that his favorite course was in the NFL's School of Hard Knocks.
The most intimidating offensive lineman in NFL history was a huge, angry man named Robert Stanford Brown. Bob Brown didn't just block people. he buried them with an aggressive attacking style that made him totally unique.
Bob Brown took the game and he played offense with a defensive guy's personality. Bob Brown believed that he could hit you with his forearm, and as he used to say, take a quarter out of you. In other words, if he really hit you, you know, that you wouldn't play hard until probably the next quarter.
I didn't try to finesse guys. I just tried to beat up on them for 60 minutes. Because I was trying to hit that area that was just below where the shoulder pads stop. There's a lot of real meaty, nice parts in that area. We can get a little bit of spleen. Usually it worked.
Everything about this Bunyan-esque character was larger than life, including his intellect. After earning a degree in biology from Nebraska, Brown moved to Philadelphia to play for the Eagles and became the Ivy League's only postgraduate student nicknamed Boomer. Brown's body was so immense that special oversized equipment had to be ordered, and in his rookie year, the Eagles routinely assigned him to block more than one man on extra points and field goals. But it soon became apparent that Brown's ability was every bit as massive as his size. Boomer had the strength to blow open huge holes with a drive block. He had the speed and agility to pull out and take on a defender in the open field. And his punishing pass blocking kept overmatched defensive ends pinned to the line of scrimmage. Brown's skill was legendary, but he remained aloof from friend and foe alike.
Sometimes I think that when we don't understand something, we either fear it or we don't like it. In some cases, I'm sure there were some people I worked with who perhaps didn't like it. I would hope that I would be judged strictly on my performance on Sunday. That meant the Machiavellian Prince concept, do whatever needed to be done to get the job done.
Brown's style made him an all-pro in Philadelphia, but his attitude earned him a one-way ticket to Los Angeles to do his dirty work for the Rams. Once again, Boomer made the Pro Bowl, and once again he was sent packing, this time to a team that matched his mood, the Oakland Raiders. Brown immediately made his impact felt.
We got Bob the first day, and no one knows, you know, Bob Brown. They don't know him personally. They just know his reputation. He walks out of the locker room, and he walks all the way up to the other end, you know, where the goalposts are, and he hits a goalpost with his forearm, knocks a goalpost. I mean, it goes whack, crack, and the whole goalpost goes right down. My whole guys, I mean, all the guys are looking like this. You know, and then they didn't know what to call him, you know, Bob, so they said, Mr. They called him Mr. Brown. Turned around, walked off the field.
And I've heard just so much about it over the years, but today I will reveal that the night before, I saw that post in half. I'm lying. It was probably rotten and it just broke. I wanted that story circulated to every defensive end in the league.
The legend of Boomer Brown is based on 9 remarkable seasons of on-the-field achievement. His legacy to the game he played so well has yet to be determined.
Bob Brown's a player that should be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, you know, when you go great players and great tackles, he was one of them. Whether he ever will be, you know, because he wasn't the most popular person.
Who knows why someone might not like Bob Brown for an interview he didn't grant many years ago. Some guy might think that Bob Brown was not nearly as good as Bob Brown thinks he was. It's hard to say, but if based on how many times you've made All-Pro, how many times you were Lineman of the Year in the National Football League, if based on merit, then Bob Brown rightfully belongs in the Hall of Fame.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed our profiles of football's legendary linemen. They really are a special breed. But, you know, buried beneath this last hour of tough talk and tall tales is one recurring theme. All of these linemen would like you to believe that they were nasty, ornery competitors, but in reality, they are all proud, decent men who played by the rules, who reveled in the challenge of their profession and played the game with a full-blooded joy. They were men of heroic strength and determination. They are truly legendary linemen.